Welcome back. I'm Angelique. I hope you have been enjoying our spring fling this year. I have finished doing all of our cornerstones. I did do a little bit of rearrangement. There was just a couple places I didn't love how it was coming together. So that is kind of the beauty of this, is you can move things around a little bit. Now I can show you how to start assembling your blocks, assembling your rows, and then how we're going to put those rows together to make the quilt top. And then when we're done with that, I'm going to show you how to quilt it, okay? So getting started here at the very top, I'm gonna use my handy dandy little marker here because I like to fold these over on here. I will clip them kind of as I go and label them so that when I finish doing the first part of the assembly, I'll know exactly what order to put them in. And I did a basic grid system. All right, so if this is row 1 and this is column A, then this is the second block, I would say 2A, right? Either way you want to do it. And then I flipped this one around, and since, I flipped it onto 3, this is 4A. And I'm just gonna do this for about 3 rows because I wanna show you assembling through row 3, because then after that it pretty much repeats what it is that you need to do. 6A. All right, so I'm moving on to the second row here. So this will be row B, block 2, and I'll just keep this going. All right, now that I have them labeled, I can just take them off the board and open up our 1A and 2A. And so I want to make sure that my points are going to come together real nicely here. And so if I'm a little bit taller or shorter, that is all going to get fixed in the sewing process anyway. So when I flip this over, what I'm trying to do is carefully line up those 2 seams and clipping that. So each one of these, I want to make sure that's lined up, and then I'm just going to do my standard 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so I have finished sewing together 1A to 2A, 3A to 4A, and so on. And so now I can start sewing my pairs together to form the row. So here's my 2A and my 4A. So I'm going to open this up. So my 2A is here, my 4A is here. So this makes this 3A. And I'm going to flip that over onto 2A. And then that's the one I'm going to sew there. And I'm just going to continue that process for that entire row. So I stayed in order by doing that. But when it comes to the seams themselves, we really only want to iron row 1. And I'll explain that a little bit more when we get the other ones done. So I'm going to go press this, put it back on the board, finish up rows 2 and 3, and then show you how you put your rows together. I've finished sewing together those 3 rows, and I've only pressed the top row. So we're going to take these 2 rows off. So this is my first and second rows. And so you can see that I'm going to want to line up my points here where they're going to come together to form the diamonds. And then I'm also going to want to line up these edges where each of the blocks come together. So I'm just going to flip row 2 onto row 1. And so this is why I said don't press the second row, because I want to nest those seams, and so I'm just going to finger press the direction that I want those seams to go. Once I get all the diamonds done, then I go back and I nest the seams that put the 2 blocks together. All right, so now I'm ready to sew those 2 rows together. The seams that I nested, I now can tell which direction I need to finish pressing them to flatten them out. And then flip it and give it a good press on the other side as well. Okay, so now you have row 1 and row 2, or row A and B. And so now let's do 3. So as you notice, you have your first diamonds that are made between your first 2, and then the second set of diamonds gets started on this row. And then every other row is top, bottom, top, bottom, top, bottom. So that's why I'm only showing you up through row 3. So this is nest, sew, press. I am aware that some of my blocks on the edges don't match up exactly perfectly, and that's okay. What I really want to fit together are the triangles that make the diamonds, and so if that gave me a piece that was just a little bit cut, strange, that's fine. I can fix that by micro cutting. It doesn't really affect my quilting since I quilt myself, but if I was going to send it to the long armor, then I would trim all that stuff as well. All right, so I'm going to finish sewing this one up. Now we would just do what we did before. We would take it back to the ironing board and press all of our seams in the direction that we had to finger press them so that they were opposite. Press this down, and you're just going to continue that row after row after row until you finish all of your rows. So the next thing would be adding a binding if you want a binding. The first part for putting on your border is the same as any border. I just kind of like to center mine. Make sure you have a good amount of overlap, and you're pretty much going to sew it on the same way. The only difference is that when I start the sewing for every location, I am going to come in about 1/4 of an inch. So I'm just going to put a little mark here so you can see. And I'm going to start sewing from this part on. And then when I get to the end, of course this will probably adjust a little bit as I'm actually sewing it. When I get close to the 1/4 of an inch at the bottom, I'm going to stop and backstitch. So I'll backstitch here and I'll backstitch here, and I'll do that for 2 of the sides so you can see the process. So I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine. So I'm just going to pay attention to where my 1/4 of an inch line is. And so the edge of my material here will reach that, but not the solid line that has no number, because that would be my 0 point. And then I'm just going to back that up, and then I'll add one to another side here. So same thing, I want to start 1/4 of an inch in. So if this is my 0, I want to move it to about there. Take a few stitches, backstitch, and then continue adding. And you'll do this for all 4 sides. When you come up to the side that has the other piece of fabric, just make sure that you pull it out of the way so that you don't accidentally sew over it. And again, as you're getting close, pay attention to where your end point is of your fabric that's underneath, and stop it right along that 1/4, backstitch a little bit. So this is the 2 that I want to connect, so I'm going to fold my quilt so that the right sides will be together, and I want to get the edges of my border lined up, and then get this nice and creased as well, just finger pressing it. And you can add a few clips. And you may have to move your clips for the next part, if you kind of depending on where you put them. But then the next thing that you want to do is you want to line up your ruler, your straight edge here, so that the angle that is created from this fold should be 45 degrees. So you'll take that across here, and you're going to draw with your pen a line right along that. And that's going to be where you sew your next seam. This is where I like to get my clips in here really good as well, because I don't want that to get all bent underneath, because this is where my seam allowance needs to end, right? Because just like I have the seam here, I want to end there. So I'm not going to sew all the way across. I'm going to stop it at that 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to backstitch just like I did before. The hardest thing about this with a larger quilt is just dealing with the weight and trying to get this straight. It doesn't matter if I start here, I start here. It really, for me, it's what side did I end up drawing on in relation to how I'm going to sew it. But I got lucky on this one. I'm going to sew from here. It makes it a little bit easier to stop here. If I need to start sewing from this side, I want to make sure I'm that 1/4 of an inch in, do that backstitch, and then sew. If I'm going to end, that's when I'm going to backstitch. And this is not a scant 1/4 of an inch. This is a sew on the line scenario, okay? So stick to that line. Make sure when you drew it, you drew a straight line. And take your time. Don't rush through this so that you get a really good miter. So, and I can see as I'm coming up to my 1/4 of an inch, then I need to really slow down, back up, backstitch, All right, once I've done that, I'm going to cut off the excess to create the seam allowance. So since I sewed directly on the line, I'm going to line up on the line and 1/4 of an inch away from that, cut that excess. And I'm going to press that seam. Again, because of the thickness of the material, I'm just going with the flow it wants to go, which is going to be away from the quilt. And you can see my nice mitered edge there. So we're at the frame now, and so the last thing that I want to show you is quilting. And you're probably thinking, well, why do I care about talking about quilting with this project? Well, it has to do with the way that we assembled it, and the fact that we did not sew every single selvage together. That's how some selvage projects are made, and I didn't do that. I did this a lot more like a collage quilt. And with a collage quilt, how you end up quilting it is the final step to make sure that everything holds down in its place. Now, I did design this to be a wall hanging, not really something I'm going to be using as an actual quilt, or that's going to need a lot of washing, but I still want it to hold together really well. We're going to do a really close together cross stitch so that every little piece gets held down really well somewhere. In the 9-piece set, we have the diamond-headed stitcher, and the reason I chose to do the crosshairs on that direction is because, remember when I put my quilt together, I did some horizontals and I did some verticals, and so this is a direction that's going to allow me to sew across both directions and not get caught in any of those potential seams. So that's why I chose the diamond one, and I am going to be pairing it up with the ruler. As you can see, I have done some of the stitches, so the first thing I'm going to do is bring up my bobbin, and I want to align it right here against the last diagonal. I can't really call it a row or a column because it's a diagonal. And then I like this one because it's going to help me keep a really close eye on my spacing between those, because I do really want it spaced, and it's a larger area compared to the ruler foot, so it's going to help me also keep it a little bit more flush against here. So I'm just going to place my ruler flush against this, and I'm going to take my time as I sew. I'm not going to rush through this, and as I start to run out of space on my ruler, which I want to make sure I've got a good grip on, I'm going to stop the machine and move on like I did here, and then I can follow up along. So I want to get the edge here right up against that previous stitch line. Get my ruler up there, and then I'm going to continue going back in the other direction because I stop at my diamond. And so now we're just going to go in the opposite direction. Notice that my ruler is now on the opposite side of my diamond so that I can get the angle the opposite direction. And so you see I have a nice stitch here. I ran into my previous stitch. So yeah, this one I'm going to fasten off because, I've been kind of playing with this a little bit. But as much as you can try to keep from having to change until you're ready, you'll really appreciate that. But it's the diamonds that are going to kind of stop me. You could, if you wanted to, go ahead and cross stitch right through the diamonds. That's just not the look that I'm looking for. All right, so that gives you an idea and the reason why behind why you really should do a tight stitch. You could just do horizontals across the vertical lines and verticals across the horizontal lines. You just want to make sure that you've got really close stitches when you do that. But I really think that this is what's really going to help put that together and really help hold it so it will last you a really long time, since this is a memory of things that you quilted over the years. Well, thank you for joining me. I hope you're inspired to save those selvages now and make something fun. And I know we had some leftover blocks. So yeah, if you've got leftovers, you don't have to throw those out. You can make a runner. I'm thinking I might make myself a little sewing apron or something. I'm not sure because I have all those leftovers. But I'm just going to go ahead and continue to work on quilting this. And until next time, so glad you joined me, and I hope you sew with love and grace.